My subject on the Daily Brief is Cathy Oddie, a family violence survivor advocate for 12 years. You've lived it, in the worst possible way. This ongoing commitment you have to family violence advocacy is more than a passion. It's a part of your being, it's a part of your life. Let's talk about some of the things that you care very much about, and one of those is family violence.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So my journey to becoming a family violence advocate is, I guess, something that I never would have asked to have happened in my life. In my early 20s, the person who was to become the perpetrator of abuse towards me entered my life when I was 22. The violence and abuse escalated fairly quickly from derogatory name calling and isolating and controlling behaviours. I, at that time, had just come back from travelling around Europe. The world was my oyster. I was at Melbourne Uni. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life before. So when these behaviours started to escalate, it really caught me by surprise, and I didn't know how to react to it. And it was within a couple of months that was the first incident that I would see as actually violence. But now I know that the earlier behaviours constitute that as well. And so there was this day where we had an argument about something fairly inconsequential.
So it was all leading to this?
Yes, because he was building up that controlling and isolating and sort of breaking me down.
So a bit of grooming going on, preparing you for what was to come.
You're using exactly the right word. Grooming is exactly what I would call this. It's how we refer to pedophiles grooming their victims is exactly the same experience that family violence survivors have. So strong, confident woman, speaking different languages, travelling the world by myself, and then all of a sudden here's this person that comes in and through the way that they manipulated and psychologically abused me was able to break away all that confidence I had in myself.
And your self-esteem.
Self-esteem. And so that day when they chased me down a road with a knife, it took me completely by shock. But I was already feeling this strange codependency with this person, a sense of almost like a Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
And that relationship lasted 3.5 years. Within that, I experienced quite horrific abuse. Initially, I was living with my two best female friends, but it all got too much for them, and I didn't realise that he was denigrating me behind my back, and they moved out. He moved his two brothers in, and when he moved his brothers in, things just got so much worse. They didn't actually intervene or really seem to care when he was being very violent. He'd have me on the ground kicking me and they wouldn't intervene. I experienced choking, punching, being burnt. There was one day when I wanted to just change the channel on the TV and he didn't want that and he broke my finger, my wedding ring finger. It'll be a constant reminder, the bump in there. And then this all culminated on my birthday of 1 year where he decided he didn't want me to leave the house when I'd voiced that I wanted to see a movie that day. And he held me hostage at gunpoint. And this was actually the very first time I rang the police about this. And the response that they had at that point in time for me was extremely poor. They came and I was barricaded upstairs in a bedroom. My back was absolutely black with bruises. And not that they looked and checked and did a welfare check around that, but I could hear their voices downstairs and he was putting on the charm, as many perpetrators do, and I couldn't hear them really making any attempt to look for this firearm. And effectively what happened was they said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I just want to be able to get out of the house. As they had me in the car, like, where do you want to go? My family live in the country, so...
No support around you?
No support, no referrals to any specialist family violence services. They just dumped me at Southern Cross Station.
Knowing what you know now, was there somewhere you could go?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Is there somewhere you can go now? And what
100%.
Advice would you give to someone who is being held hostage, who is living your torment, who is going through what you went through for 3.5 years?
3.5 years of being in the relationship and 10 years of stalking afterwards. What I would say is, here and now, if I was making that same phone call to the police, it would have an entirely different response. He would be the one removed. I would be offered...
Would have a different tone too?
Absolutely. They would be putting a family violence safety notice into place. There would be the start of the intervention order process. They would seek to represent you and get that on your behalf, which hasn't been my experience previously of having to navigate court systems by myself, and that's a really, really intimidating and scary experience.
In reality, what would you like to see the Royal Commission deliver?
So, in regards to the Royal Commission into Family Violence,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that all 227 recommendations are actually fully implemented
And
as
acted
intended and acted on.
Yeah.
This is also a magnificent opportunity to actually shine a light within this Royal Commission around the particular needs of those who've experienced trauma such as family violence and sexual assault, and the increased need for trauma specialist services that are fully funded under Medicare.
And not only that, to be there and be ongoing.
Absolutely. So when you've gone through these types of experiences, it's something that you potentially will be living with for the rest of your life. And it can trigger you at different times. And this is why, for example, one of the recommendations that came from my evidence, which is recommendation 104, is about the healing and recovery needs of survivors of family violence, to ensure that psychological supports are not just funded at point of crisis, but on an on-needs basis for as long as you need it.
What would you consider a really good outcome? You touched on the fact that they accept the recommendations, but deep down, what would you want from the Royal Commission other than that?
So what I think the most important thing that I've seen over the years is the ability for services to actually work together. So breaking down this
So the
siloed...
left hand knows what the right hand's doing.
Exactly. So you've got community sector organisations, legal organisations, police, corporate, government are all actually communicating and working together to share their knowledge and resources so that you have actually better outcomes.
Okay, I'm going to make you, because of this extraordinary challenge that you've had to face, I have a magic wand that you didn't know about, and I want to make you the Minister for Family Services and Domestic Violence. What is the first thing we're going to do to make sure that things get better?
Well, the biggest thing that needs to happen on a federal level is for the funding to be increased exponentially. You have Victoria, which is from the Royal Commission committed over $1 billion in funding. And when you see federally, they're committing only a paltry 77 million, you really have to question that.
So you're saying to me that the Victorian government has put up $1 billion?
Yes.
And the federal government
Yes.
has put up a paltry 77 million?
That's correct.
That's extraordinary.
Yes, and when you look at family violence and the impact that it has here in Australia, that it is the leading preventable cause of death, disease and disability for women aged 15 to 44, that last year 69 women were murdered as a result of family violence. 234 calls have been made to the police already today. Yet, today, already 234 calls. But if you look at what the federal government commits to terrorism, how many Australian lives were lost in the last year as a result of terrorism? Every single day, every minute of the day, people's lives are affected by family violence.
Cathy Oddie, that sounds to me like we have an epidemic.
It is, it's a national emergency.
We need to address it.
100%. And it's, yet again, it's actually being led, in terms of government response, has to be led from family violence specialist services who know what they need and what they want and how services and organisations can work in connection with each other.
Cathy Oddie, thank you for joining us on the Daily Brief. What an insight, what a story, and we wish you strong advocacy, and we trust that when the Royal Commission does finally hand down its findings, that those recommendations that you want to be addressed are indeed addressed. Thank you.
Thanks.